Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's LIHEAP Technical Assistance webinar on weatherization for tribal grantees. My name is Benita Sinaraja, and I will be your moderator from the contracted LIHEAP Technical Assistance team at Brilliant. And as a quick reminder to all of you, we are recording today's call, and we will have it available on the LIHEAP website at a later date in just a couple of weeks. We will also be sure to send out the slides to everyone who's on the call after this webinar. So you will have access to all of the great materials we're going to show today. You are currently all in listen-only mode. After dialing into the webinar, you should have entered in your access code and audio PIN, which are located on the control panel. And it's really important that you enter in that audio PIN as it enables me as your moderator to unmute your line so that you can speak on the call. And when it's time for the question and answer section, you can enter your question into the question box in the control panel or click on the raise hand icon. We are going to be holding questions until the end of the presentation. However, if you think of a question throughout the webinar and you don't want to lose that thought, feel free to type it in at any time, and we'll make sure we read it aloud to the presenters, or we'll unmute your line when the time comes. So definitely, as we're going right in those questions, we don't want to forget good thoughts, and we'll definitely cover them all as we go on. Okay, so first and foremost, we want to run a quick poll with all of you. Let me launch that. So before we get started, we just want to learn about everyone who's on the call. So just take a moment to let us know if you have a weatherization program or not by answering this poll question. And we'll leave it open for just a couple seconds. Looks like we're getting some good responses in. About a third of the group has voted. Okay, great. Let me close that poll and share those results. Okay, so we're about evenly split amongst all of our groups attending today, which is great. All right, and if you were thinking you're one of those few people that doesn't have a weatherization program or didn't think you need one, don't worry, you're not alone in that. You can see on this map that about a third of the LIHEAP tribal grantees have a weatherization component. And this map is just showing locations where tribes are administering a LIHEAP weatherization program. So it doesn't necessarily mean across the entire state that that coverage is there, but those are the locations where tribes are having some weatherization programs. Okay, and then I've got one more poll question before I introduce our speakers real quick. Let me launch that. Okay, so let's find out, regardless of whether or not you have a LIHEAP weatherization program, what does that term weatherization mean to you? And there's absolutely no right or wrong answer here. We just want to know, for your program components that they're tailored to fit the needs of the households you serve, what does this term mean to you in your program? So we'll leave that poll open for a little bit longer. Almost everyone's voted. All right, let me share those results. All right, so it looks like there's some consensus among the group that to all of you on the call, it means updating a living space as much as possible to bring down a household's energy burden. All right, thanks for participating in those. It helps to get an idea of what everybody is doing on the call. Now, I wanted to just briefly introduce all of our fabulous speakers today, many of whom should not be a stranger to most of you. We've got Holly, the Program Policy and Evaluation Branch Chief, Akam, the Program Operations Branch Chief, and Vicki, one of the Energy Assistance Program Specialists. So 3 awesome speakers from the OCS team who all of you know really well and are able to share a lot of guidance and expertise on weatherization. And then we're really fortunate today to have two grantee speakers who are representing very different perspectives. One is a tribal grantee, Patricia Eagle from Eastern Shoshone, and then we've also got Brenda from the state of Wyoming's LIHEAP program as well, who can both share from their perspective how they work together, what considerations they've had with weatherization programs, their funding challenges and whatnot. So a lot of really great perspectives, and we're going to have different parts throughout the webinar where we'll get to hear from our grantee perspective. So with that, let me turn it over to Holly, who can cover the agenda of all the components we're going to cover today.
All right, thanks, Benita. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to quickly walk through the agenda of what we're going to try to accomplish today. Our goal is to talk about existing weatherization programs, but also to get, not just to talk about existing weatherization programs, but to give you information that could help you set up your own weatherization program if you choose to do so. We'll look at weatherization and how it can positively impact your community. And then we'll identify some of the weatherization options that are out there to use. We'll also look at how weatherization funding works with the things that you can do within the programs and how you can set up your program. And finally, we'll provide you with some weatherization resources and hold a question and answer session at the end for about 15 or so minutes. All right, so what is weatherization? Our statute actually defines weatherization as a way of doing low-cost residential weatherization or other energy-related home repair for low-income households, particularly those low-income households with the lowest incomes that pay the highest portion of the household income for energy. So everybody who answered that to reduce energy burden, that's one way that you can reduce energy burden with the LIHEAP resource. And so you were correct in your answer, and that is what weatherization does, but there is a variety of different weatherization programs out there, and you can actually somewhat decide what kind of weatherization program you're going to set up within your own LIHEAP resource. Next slide. All right, so what weatherization is, it's you guys had it right, it's things people can do to lower energy costs and making sure that the households remain healthy and safe from weather-related conditions. What it is not housing repair. There's an asterisk there because there is the ability to do energy-related housing repair. So if you are going to, let's say, install some insulation in the attic, and there was a minor repair that needed to be done on the roof, you could do that with LIHEAP weatherization resources. What you cannot do is replace the roof completely. It is not housing rehabilitation, it's not housing restoration or housing accessibility as it relates to like building ramps for folks to access their housing unit and what have you. Really what it is focused on energy related measures. Those energy measures are low cost in nature and cost effective in nature. So that is what weatherization is. So in looking at what your options are, Vicki's going to get into a little bit more detail on the different components on the options related to designing your program. But what I'm going to talk about specifically are options as it relates to measures. And when we say low cost, cost effective, some of the things that I want you guys to consider is if you look at the screen on the left, you have building shell measures. And what that is air sealing, insulation, and windows and doors. And when it comes down to windows and doors really are not, they're in an area of the building that is not necessarily that has a big impact on energy. But if you have broken windows, of course, those would be energy efficient and cost effective. If you have damaged window sills and that sort of thing, anything that reduces air infiltration into a unit is a big bang for the buck when it comes to weatherization measures. And those are usually low cost installations. Air sealing is something that is relatively inexpensive and actually has a big bang for the buck in not only helping with comfort, health and safety inside the house, but also with energy. And then you get into mechanical measures. And some of those mechanical measures, now, if you get concerned about the qualification in our language that says cost-effective measures, if you have a house that has a heating system that is 80% efficient and you put in a 90% efficient furnace, that's cost-effective because 90% is more efficient than 80%. And so, you know, those are the types of things that you wouldn't have to, you know, cost justify or go through some energy audit or what have you. Those are things that we would consider here at LIHEAP outside of like the complexity of some of the other programs that are out there as it relates to weatherization. So when you design your program, if you know that your community has a need for like heating upgrades and they haven't had them in a while, then you might want to consider looking at, you know, going to a higher efficiency furnace and not have to worry about going through a diagnostic process following the Department of Energy's weatherization program. And why I'm mentioning that now is because it's going to come up a little later, because that is a component that you can completely follow, but it's not something that we would require. So if you're going to choose to set up your own LIHEAP weatherization program, you do have a lot more flexibility in building that. Some other measures would include appliances such as cook stoves, refrigerators, and then you also have water heaters on there. So you're allowed to do various housing stock and weatherization, so you can do mobile homes. And there are a whole list of measures that are actually in Section 5 of your plan. I know you guys recently submitted your plan, but that's in Section 5 of your plan, and you can sort of check off those measures that you're going to include in your LIHEAP weatherization program. Next slide, please.
Okay, thanks, Holly. So now that we've kind of gone through a few examples, this is our first opportunity to allow our guest panelists to share how they first considered weatherization and some of the measures that they use in their programs. And of course, as I mentioned, Brenda and Patricia have a special relationship, which I think they'll speak to, so I won't give it all away. But Patricia, why don't you go ahead and go first and kind of conveying how Eastern Shoshone considered weatherization and how you came to be working with the state and some of the measures, challenges that you've considered.
Okay, with the Eastern Shoshone, we chose not to have a weatherization component within our plan. We do have an interagency agreement with the state of Wyoming. And again, that goes back to our funding that, you know, for our area. And what we do when it comes to the challenges that we have here is, again, we have a lack of funding for weatherization, and we do referrals to Brenda by knowing that when a client needs a weatherization, we have that question on our application. And based on their energy costs through the LIHEAP program, we know that they are in the need of weatherization services.
Okay, great. Thanks, Patricia. Brenda, do you want to kind of continue the process that Patricia was alluding to of how they referred to you?
Sure. Well, on the first question, what made Wyoming first consider a weatherization component? That was in place when I came on board. I think in the past we didn't have a very good process in place for communicating with our tribal partners to make sure that we're getting approved, recipients referred for weatherization, so that the state program could go into those homes and work to weatherize those homes. Some of the measures that we use in the state program now, we do require a comprehensive energy audit for every home that we weatherize in Wyoming. And that is the same regardless of the housing type or, the client. That's just our policy. And so those measures that typically rank high on our energy audits are going to be air sealing, insulation. A lot of those measures that Holly alluded to, those tend to rank very high when you go in and do an energy audit. So, that seems to be pretty much the same across the board. I mentioned, one of the challenges in prior years, we really just didn't have a process in place for getting referrals for the tribal recipients to make sure that we're providing the weatherization service. Now, our other tribal partner, the Northern Arapaho, they do have a DOE, Department of Energy funded weatherization program. So they are able to perform weatherization for their members themselves. And, the big positive impact, as has been mentioned before, is when you have the opportunity to combine weatherization so that you make a home more energy efficient and the heating assistance program, you are going to get an increased reduction in the energy cost, the energy burden for that particular family. So it's really important, I think, to look at it from that standpoint.
Great. Thanks, Brenda. We'll definitely hear from Patricia and Brenda again very soon. But for now, I'd like to turn it over to Akam, who's going to talk about funding.
Thank you, Benita. Welcome all. I am going to begin my piece of the presentation by broadly talking about funding and then get into some of the details, but also the way this presentation is designed, that I will be reinforcing some of the points that Holly mentioned already and some of the points that will come up throughout the presentation, including Vicky's. So first question is, how does the LIHEAP funding work for weatherization? As you all know, that it's a block grant, and because of block grant, LIHEAP has flexibility in how the weatherization component is run. Funding level and the number of households served vary greatly. For example, one grantee may have $3,000 to serve 10 households, while another grantee has $10,000 to serve 200 households. The LIHEAP statute defines the percentage of LIHEAP funds that can be allocated to weatherization. So for example, 15%, it's an optional measure. You do not have to have a weatherization program, but if you'd like, you can use up to 15% of your LIHEAP allocation towards weatherization, and you can go up to 25% if needed with a written waiver from OCS. In fact, so far I remember, we just approved a weatherization waiver for a tribe, the first time maybe in many years, to go up to 25% for weatherization purposes. Other things here that we should look at is primarily LIHEAP is viewed as a bill payment assistance program. And I think the intent of keeping the maximum at 15 or 25%, the idea is that if you have needs and you have the ability to provide resources for weatherization, please do so. And if you need to increase your weatherization allocation from 15% even to 25 or anywhere between 15 and 25, let us know. We can help you with the waiver process. So I am going to read this sentence very slowly and purposefully. weatherization funds may be used to provide low-cost residential weatherization and other cost-effective energy-related home repair. You heard it from Holly before, so there are key points here. Weatherization funds should be used for low-cost residential weatherization efforts that are cost-effective and energy-related. There is a technical definition of cost effectiveness. For example, cost effectiveness means that the expected energy cost savings over the lifetime of a weatherization measure is more than cost of the measure. For example, caulk and weather strips are usually cost effective because the cost of the measure is low. On the other hand, the cost of replacing a window is usually much higher than the energy savings it produces, especially when it's compared to just sealing the window. Other things to consider, does it meet the household's need? Is it low cost? We all know the difference between a regular light bulb, an LED bulb, an Energy Star versus non-Energy Star equipment. So we don't have to have such a technical definition, but if you'd like, you can use that definition like that for cost effectiveness. Holly has also mentioned this before. So let's see how weatherization funds are being allocated across the country. Even though there is an option to have a LIHEAP weatherization component, that doesn't mean that every tribal grantee has one. So for example, in fiscal year 2018, 2/3 of tribal grantees did not have a LIHEAP funded weatherization component. This could be because the grantees thought that the funds could be better used, or they may not have realized that the cost benefits of including a weatherization component is out there. Total tribal funding in 2019, for weatherization, LIHEAP weatherization, was approximately $2.4 million. We know that we allocate anywhere between $36 to $40 million to a tribe for LIHEAP funding. So this simple math comes to about anywhere between 4 to 6% of the funds actually going towards LIHEAP weatherization program, which means that there is a potential for grantees to add or to improve a weatherization component in future program year if there's a need and if there are resources available for that purpose. Okay. Just to wrap up on this item, each grantee has different situations, so not every grantee will allocate the same amount on this program component. You can see on the slide that the median weatherization tribal funding in 2019, I believe, was 2018 rather, was $13,887.
Okay, thanks, Akam. So we're going to go back to our panelists to just think about what factors they were considering when deciding about LIHEAP money. And of course, we know that Brenda's running that program, and Patricia works with her to get her tribal residents covered. But so, Brenda, could you talk about some of the factors that you considered when deciding the amount of LIHEAP funds you wanted to allot to your weatherization component?
Sure. You know, definitely the amount of funding that remains after we've served out the priority items, like paid the heating benefits out and so on and so forth, that's definitely a big consideration. We always look at the projected cost benefit because we really firmly believe that the benefit is high. So, you know, we definitely look at that. And then a third thing we look at is the capacity of our weatherization agencies for being able to use additional funds. A big example that I can point to would be a few years back, 2009, when we had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funding, the stimulus funds for weatherization. You know, during that period of time, which was about a 36-month period, we didn't allot as many LIHEAP funds to our weatherization program because we had so much of the stimulus funds, and we were required to get those funds spent out in that finite period of time. So capacity was a very real consideration at that point in time. So you always want to make sure that you're able to deliver the services and utilize the funding in for the purpose that it's intended for. So those are the three basic considerations we look at.
Thanks, Brenda. Yep. So some of the other typical factors we want to point out, Brenda already mentioned them, the cost benefit and the capacity, but you may want to think about the allotment that you've received in the past, what money is left over, seasonal demand and whatnot. So definitely great point. Thank you. And Akam, back to you for some budget considerations.
Okay, are we on the right slide? Or... Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so you heard already that the funding for LIHEAP weatherization can be very limited, and also it depends on which tribe is trying to begin or expand their weatherization program out of LIHEAP. So some of the things that you must consider when you're budgeting for weatherization, one is administration. In other words, how are you going to pay for staff salaries, other costs such as audit, or if you have indirect costs that needs to build into the administration cost for LIHEAP weatherization. One key thing here is that the LIHEAP, there is a restriction on the LIHEAP admin funds for LIHEAP, and that's slightly different for tribes. But when you're using administration for LIHEAP weatherization, or for that matter for any other federal programs, the LIHEAP admin cap applies to that. So please be mindful about that. We often see that there's an item in grantee budget, we call it program support. Also, you should define what it means and whether the program support items are being funded out of admin or funded out of your program dollars. And as LIHEAP is a block grant, you, the grantee, should define those. There are some other basic costs for weatherization. For example, the labor cost, materials, training and technical assistance for your staff, and tools and things that you need to complete a weatherization job. So think about it not just in isolation, but think about it as a program that is part of LIHEAP, but it does have very different budgetary needs compared to a bill payment assistance program such as LIHEAP. Next slide, please. Okay.
Okay, so now we want to hear from all of you who are on the webinar. Just go ahead and type into the chat function on your control panel what you think might be some of the fiscal factors that prevent a tribe from allotting LIHEAP funds to a weatherization component. Again, no right or wrong. I won't call out any names at all, but go ahead and just kind of add what are some of the factors that you think would stop a tribe from being able to allot those funds. And we'll leave that open for a few seconds. Again, you can just type in your answer into the chat box in your control panel on your screen. And again, I promise I won't call out anybody's names. So feel free to write in what you think. Okay, so somebody wanted me to repeat the question. So it's the question that's on the screen right now. What are the fiscal factors that prevent a tribe from allotting LIHEAP funds to a weatherization component? So it looks like some of the answers are, seasonal demand. So if something happens, a bad winter or whatnot, that can definitely increase demand for sure. May not make fiscal sense too if it's not cost effective, as we've been talking about savings over the cost. Okay, great. So some of the answers which have already been stated too, so lack of funding, you may have a small LIHEAP grant, certainly, so then taking away some of those dollars towards that weatherization component may not make sense for your program. High demand, as we were talking about, doesn't seem cost effective, and it for the weatherization services, or may not be cost effective for LIHEAP as well. All right, thanks for the participation. Let me turn it back over to Akam.
Thank you. While we're in the same topic, let's talk about some of the solutions. When thinking about a weatherization component, you will want to take some time to think about how you will control the cost related to weatherization. In other words, how am I going to limit the cost for weatherization? There are many ways this can be done. There's no one way to do this. You will want to do what's best to shape in your program needs. But there are a few common policies that you could put in place, and I'm going to just give you some examples. For example, average cost per unit. Maintaining a maximum average cost per unit helps keep the cost under control and your program within budget. Cost effectiveness, we already talked about that. Just make sure that you pick the weatherization measures that are cost effective based on some of the examples we have already provided to you. Weatherization cost limiting the use of more expensive measures saves money. Require prior approval and often can be not productive. For example, I'll give you one example here, such as window and door replacement or furnace replacement. These are all needed items, but also think about these items in the context of how much money you have available or made available for LIHEAP weatherization. Most importantly, you should set a budget and set some target numbers for units, average cost, and then also must try to maintain that budget unless it is absolutely necessary, because if you go over your budget, then it will have impact on your overall weatherization allocation budget. Not only that, it might also create an impact on your overall LIHEAP funds that you have allocated for that specific fiscal year. Okay, so how can we use our weatherization funds? We'll talk about some examples here again. The best way to control those costs is to limit weatherization to inexpensive but effective measures. We talked about that before. So for example, let's look at two specific examples here. A 1/8 inch gap under an outside door lets as much cold air in as 2.5 inch hole punched in the wall. So under the door gap as versus a hole in the wall. So it's basically they are the same. So think about which one would be most effective. Studies show that in most cases, simply treating windows and doors with caulk and weather strip is one of the least costly but most effective ways to weatherize a house. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, just offering two weatherization measures, such as the air sealing and insulation, can save homeowners on heating and cooling costs. The air sealing, for example, most commonly understood that it will stop air coming inside the house, and insulation will help maintain indoor temperature, for example. Some examples here, Belgium actually did a survey of the LIHEAP model plans and household reports from 2018. And as you can see, according to this survey, there are several tribes showing here from Oregon, Michigan, Alaska, and Montana who are already using LIHEAP for weatherization purposes. For example, Confederated Tribes of Warm Spring and Grand Traverse Tribe offer only low-cost but effective weatherization measures in order to serve a greater number of households. Aleutian and Blackfeet have chosen to concentrate on furnace repair, and therefore they're serving fewer households because, as you know, furnace repairs and furnace replacements are way more expensive than just applying some of the low-cost weatherization measures that we have already discussed. And remember that there is not one right or best way to manage these components. These are just a few examples for you to think about. An important part of an effective weatherization component is in working with other weatherization programs in the area. Assurance 4 of the LIHEAP statute requires such effort. For example, there are many other programs out there that are conducting weatherization activities. I'll give you one specific example. The U.S. Department of Energy has weatherization grantees throughout the country. It is important for you as a tribe to know who is providing weatherization in your area and see if you can coordinate with those local programs. Okay, some key points here. I'm not going to go through the entire slide, but please remember that working with other local programs help exchange information and ideas on weatherization while making sure that there are not any duplication of services and the local needs are met. For example, if you're running a weatherization program and you cannot meet your need, always think about referring households, unmet households, to a local program. You can always exchange information with the local weatherization provider. You can share and also gain knowledge by working with them very closely. So it is very important for you to not only just run a weatherization program or not to run a weatherization program, but also think it from the client need perspective. Do I have weatherization needs out there? And am I able to meet the need by running a LIHEAP weatherization program? And if I'm not, what other resources out there who could benefit my own tribal household? So think about it from a much larger perspective. Go beyond your own tribe, own consideration. Find out who's out there. And if you need us to provide a list of other grantees, we can, I believe, do that for you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ekam. I've got another poll question from you on the line. Are states required to provide weatherization for households in your LIHEAP plan if you don't offer weatherization? Go ahead and click on yes or no. Again, no wrong answer. We won't call you out. And we'll open it for another 10 seconds or so for all of you to vote. Okay, let me close that poll. All right, looks like we're split half and half of yes or no. So let me turn it over to Holly. And Holly, what do you think about that? Half the group saying yes, well, half the group saying no.
Yeah, and I think the thing is like required to provide, they're required to provide access to weatherization services. As you can see on the slide in front of you, this is pulled from the Department of Energy's weatherization regulations. Code of Federal Regulations 440.16 says that grantees have to address how they are going to provide low-income members of an Indian tribe services for weatherization. So they shall receive benefits equivalent to the assistance provided to low-income persons within the state unless a grantee has made a recommendation provided, and that reference is actually unless a tribe is a direct grantee of that state, kind of like a sub-grantee that may also provide weatherization off of the tribe or near your tribe. So I just wanted to point this out as you think about your weatherization program, or if you want to consider a weatherization program, one, are you aware of the fact of how to apply for the resources available at the state or at a local nonprofit near you? Do the members of your tribe know how to access the weatherization program that exists in the area? If not, I would highly recommend contacting that weatherization coordinator at the state and figure out, like, what is in their state plan. They have to submit a state plan like you have to submit a LIHEAP model plan. And in that plan for weatherization, you have the opportunity to provide feedback during a public hearing process. If you're not aware of this, please contact them, get a hold of them. And if you need that contact information later on in the presentation, we're going to provide you resources. But as always, reach out to your liaison. They could put you in touch with the contact page, and that would give you the appropriate contact for the DOE Weatherization Coordinator. The other thing that I want to make sure you guys know is that when you think about setting up your program, Vicki's going to go into more detail on the 3 ways that you can set up a LIHEAP weatherization program with LIHEAP resources. And one of them is actually coordinating with the DOE partners. And so by knowing who does DOE within your region, there may be the ability to partner with them on doing a weatherization hybrid LIHEAP program, DOE program, 100% DOE, or, you know, figuring out maybe how to access those resources and that training that they've already received and have to have on the weatherization side. So I did want to make you guys aware of the fact that you should know how to apply. Your tribal members should know how to apply to receive weatherization. I did hear earlier on one of the poll questions, or one of the questions, that, you know, the need is too great. And I think that would indicate to me that, you know, maybe you don't feel like your tribe has access to the resource or knows how to apply. And so, you know, maybe this is one thing you can take away from this webinar is contact your state weatherization coordinator and get involved, get engaged, find out how you can have your tribal members apply for that program. All right, next slide. I'm turning it over to Vicki.
Thanks, Holly. So everybody, at this point, you might just be asking yourself how you can incorporate a weatherization component into your program. One of the first considerations you should make is how to administer it through policy. It's important to have formal written weatherization policies and to strictly follow those policies because the nature of the program is such that the agency creates certain legal responsibilities in working on individual properties. So written rules will clearly spell out the responsibilities of the tribal agency and the owner of the property as well. There are several aspects of policy development for a weatherization component that you all should consider when adding or looking to improve a current weatherization component. So let's look at some of those now. So just like with your LIHEAP plan, the weatherization component has a lot of flexibility in how you decide to administer it. So if you're thinking about a weatherization component for your LIHEAP plan, you'll need to define a set of rules, excuse me, to define a set of rules you intend to follow in writing. And there are 3 methods that you can choose to adopt. The first is that you could base your program on some or all of the DOE weatherization rules. This option would provide you with the least flexibility, but it also does greatly reduce the time that it takes to develop your own procedures. It also uses proven methods of component administration. The second way is that you can base your program on some or all of the LIHEAP weatherization rules. This option would provide you with the greatest flexibility to administer this component, but it also requires a lot of time to develop your own procedures. And then lastly, you could base your program on a combination of both the LIHEAP and the DOE weatherization rules. This option provides you with some flexibility. It reduces the time to develop your own procedures. And you could use the DOE rules for areas that you aren't as familiar with and come up with your own procedures for areas where their rules don't really work for your program. If you decide to have a LIHEAP weatherization program that uses some or all of the DOE rules, Title 42 of the U.S. Code, Section 8624, Subpart C1D requires you to describe in your model plan to what degree you're going to adopt those rules and exactly which rules you intend to use. And so here's that rule right here. The LIHEAP statute allows for the use of LIHEAP funds to one degree or another within the Department of Energy Weatherization Assistance Program, known as WAP, in those rules. It says that a tribe plan must describe weatherization and other energy-related home repairs the tribe will provide and describe any rules publicized by the DOE that the tribe will follow. So keep in mind when writing weatherization policy that DOE already has very well-developed policies that can be adopted by your program or at least used as guidance. We'll highlight several DOE weatherization websites in our resources section at the end of this presentation. Next slide. Weatherization policies and procedures will mostly mirror your LIHEAP plan in such areas as applications and eligibility, but you will need to think about some weatherization specific policies, like what types of buildings you're going to weatherize. If you have developed or you're thinking about a weatherization component, here are some program policy areas on this slide that you should examine in designing your own written policies. These and other weatherization policies must be written in a weatherization section of your LIHEAP manual.
Great, thanks, Vicki. We'll go back to Vicki in just a minute, but wanted to turn back to Patricia and Brenda right now to discuss how you all select your households that you refer for the weatherization program services. So even for Patricia, as you have to refer to the state, you know, are your households on a waiting list? How do you further prioritize them? So Patricia, do you want to go first and just kind of talk about your recipient selection?
Sure. What our participants selection is based on the question on the application, and also doing a face-to-face interview with the client, asking them what kind of, you know, what is cost and, you know, energy burden on their home, like broken windows, if it's just energy, like I guess more air. We do have classes that for our clients under our Assurance 16, the education, and we show them how to weatherize their home by putting plastic over their windows, weather stripping their windows and doors. But if it's more than that, with broken windows, broken doors, then we refer them to, well, actually emailing or faxing their application to Brenda, and then from there, she takes over of where the application needs to go, and if their home needs to be assessed by the state. But that's, how we do it is just a face-to-face interview with the client with their needs. This is it.
Great. Brenda, what about you?
Okay. And Patty, I really like that idea you mentioned where you are actually holding training sessions for your recipients and teaching them how to do some of the weatherization themselves. That's wonderful. In the state program, once an applicant has been determined income eligible and meets all the eligibility requirements for both the weatherization and the heating assistance, we use one dual application for both programs, by the way. Then they are approved for both programs unless the system pops up and says, hey, this home has been weatherized previously. Then we're not going to approve them again unless it was prior to 1994. Then we might at some point take another look at it. But so once that's done, our system, our computer system, will do some preliminary prioritization of those approved weatherization applications based on if there's a member in the home who's age 60 or above, or a child age 5 and under, or somebody with some kind of a disability condition. Then the weatherization agencies for the state of Wyoming, they're able to go into the system, access those applications, pull them up, and then they do some further prioritization of those applications based on energy use and high energy burdens. And then, of course, we contact those with the highest number of priority points first. So when we receive the referrals from Patty, we utilize that same process. We're going to assess their priority points. We may have to go back and ask a couple of questions to make sure that we get them in a high enough priority level. And then we do have a crew based in Fremont County, which is where the tribal programs are located. So we do have an agency right there that's able to easily go out and perform the work. So that's basically how we do it in Wyoming. We do have usually a pretty large waiting list, and sometimes it may take several years before we get to those eligible applicants who have very low priority points, because we tend to run out of funds before we get everybody served. So we encourage them to continue applying year after year in hopes that we can eventually get to them.
Thanks, Brenda. That's really helpful. So I've just listed on the screen some typical ways that recipients can be selected. Again, these are just on average. You, as a grantee, you're going to pick and choose what works for your program. So as Patty had already mentioned herself too, there's the applicant self-selection. Brenda talked about vulnerable households, the elderly or young children. There could be those households receiving high benefit amounts, or those high energy households. Certainly also first come, first serve from the date. You're trying to assess who needs what and go in a proper order, or maybe a program benefit cost level too. So these are just some typical factors. All right, Vicki, back to you about income limits.
Thanks, Benita. So another aspect to consider is the applicant's actual financial eligibility. As you all know, one of the options, for example, is that for eligibility is that a household is at 150% of the federal poverty level. But with weatherization, you have the option to expand that eligibility to 200% of the federal poverty level for the weatherization component. According to the 2019 LIHEAP Clearinghouse report, in terms of financial eligibility policy, most tribal grantees use the same financial eligibility level for weatherization as they do for their other LIHEAP components. So that's either the 150 of federal poverty level or the 60% of the SMI, the state median income. There was only one tribe that adopted DOE's weatherization eligibility level of 200% of the federal poverty level for its LIHEAP weatherization, and it used 60% of the state median income for the LIHEAP benefit. Next slide.
Okay, and back to our grantees for just one final question about if you have any limits on the housing that you weatherize, and what's the impact of that on your budget? I think this might be more for Brenda.
Okay. The unit considerations that we use in Wyoming, you know, we do both owner-owned homes and rental units. So it could be a single-family manufactured home or mobile home, or a single-family site-built or stick-built home. It could be either of those as a rental unit. We don't have in Wyoming very much in the way of the big box multifamily housing unit types. So those kinds of units that we tend to see in weatherization, it might be a duplex or a fourplex, and that's simply because we don't have much in the way of multifamily units, but we will address those as well. And in our bigger towns, for example, Casper and Cheyenne, the capital city, we do have a few of what you would look at as the big box apartment complexes. And we have done a couple of those in the past. We have a policy in place that requires the owner of that property to pay for the multifamily quality energy audit, and then provide that information to us to provide to our weatherization agencies, who would then go in and actually, based on that audit, perform the weatherization work. But like I say, we just don't have much in the way of multifamily housing. So those are really, you know, about the only thing we don't weatherize is a camper trailer. I guess maybe that's the easier way to put it. And, you know, we use the per unit average that is set each year by the Department of Energy. And, you know, we don't exceed that in terms of the per unit average to manage our budget. So really, the types of homes themselves do not have much of an impact on the budget. What does have an impact is that we have a lot of very poor housing stock. And so you get into some of those homes, and obviously it's going to increase the budget. You may also have to go refer that particular family out for other resources, because there may be structural repairs that are required to be done before we can even proceed with the weatherization. Does that answer that? Does that make sense?
Yep, it sure does. Thank you.
You bet.
All right. Well, let's go to that resources section. Vicki, do you want to walk us through this? And I just as a quick reminder, you're going to see a lot of links on the page, but we will be sending out these slides again to all of you, so you'll have access to be able to view all of these resources yourself on your own time. So take it away, Vicki.
All right, great. Thanks, Benita. So as she mentioned, the following slides are going to show a number of available resources to help in thinking about developing or strengthening an existing weatherization program. And as she said, it might look a little overwhelming just as displayed on the slide, but all of this information will be provided to you so you can have a look at it at your own convenience. The first set of resources are some program guidance resources around the DOE weatherization rules. Next slide. Then we have some here about some additional WAP guidance, which is the DOE weatherization program. Next slide. These are some resources available on our own LIHEAP clearinghouse, as well as additional resources on the DOE weatherization site. Next slide. Some statistics are there available. There's some technical information here from DOE. And then we also have some an actual technical assistance group that works specifically, assistance center is the terminology used, which should be very helpful. Next slide. Some statutory references from the LIHEAP statute that refer to weatherization. And then some regulatory resources from the Code of Federal Regulations. And then as always, we in the Office Division of Energy Assistance are always happy to help whenever you have any questions or you would like to be pointed in the right direction. We can't always say we know the answers right off the top of our heads, but we are certainly willing to do a little research for you and again, point you in the right direction to get you the answers that you need so that you can operate a program that is most responsive to your community members. Holly?
All right, with that, this is the end of the LIHEAP Tribal Weatherization webinar. We want to have some time left for folks to be able to ask questions. Benita, I'm going to briefly summarize it and then hand it over to you to MC the questions. Does that work?
Sure does.
All right. So we want to make sure we hit home the point that weatherization in LIHEAP is to reduce the home energy use. This will have a longer term impact on the households that you guys currently serve with the LIHEAP benefits. Maybe reduce their utility bill, and therefore maybe you could serve another household. You know, when you consider doing a program, look at the whole picture on saying, okay, we have folks using a lot of energy here. Could we reduce that and potentially even serve more households within our community? That's one of the things that LIHEAP weatherization would allow you to do. It also allows you to get into those homes and potentially have an impact on the health and safety of those residents in those homes. And then you have some flexibility with how you design your program. So design your program to meet your community's needs. That's key, but just keep in mind it's low cost, energy related weatherization. It's cost effective, and you know, we always want to make sure we do no harm and install measures with quality installation standards. So with that, that's basically what we were trying to communicate, and if anyone has questions, feel free to let us know.
All right, thanks so much to all of our speakers. So this time I want to remind all of you, if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and click on the raised hand icon and I can unmute your line. You must have put in your audio pin in order for me to unmute your line and allow you to ask your question. Or if you don't want to speak on the call, which is totally fine, you can go ahead and write in your question, and I'm happy to ask that to our panelists to give you some guidance. And so if you have any questions on how you might add weatherization to your program, or maybe complete the weatherization component of your LIHEAP plan, I know you've submitted yours for this year, but in the future, how to work on that, or if you've got a question about resources, or if you can't you've heard today from one tribe, who it didn't work for them to have their own weatherization component, so they've worked out a great agreement and a great relationship with their state counterpart. So maybe do you need to take advantage of some other options available to you to help your households? But let us know if you've got any other questions. In the meantime, while we give people a second to either hit the raise hand icon or ask a question, I think we wanted to go back and clarify one thing about the weatherization income limits. And Kate, did you want to go ahead and add that clarification real quick?
Sure, and thank you to all the presenters today on the webinar. I think you all provided a lot of great information about your options and if you'd like to implement a weatherization program as part of your LIHEAP grant. I did want to point out that when Vicki was going over the options to consider for your policies if you decide to implement a LIHEAP weatherization program, she did mention that you could potentially go up to 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, and that would be covered in Section 5 of your model plan. However, I wanted to clarify that you could only go up to 200% of the federal poverty guidelines if you decide to implement the Department of Energy's Weatherization Assistance Program rules in full or mostly. So most of the tribes probably would develop their own rules for their weatherization program, and that is okay as well. And you could still go up to 60% of the state median income. So those are just some points of clarification I wanted to make about weatherization, and again, that would be in Section 5 of your model plan.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kate. I had a quick question for Brenda and Patty, and that was just to speak to your relationship of how you guys work together. How often do you guys touch base? Every year, or are you touching base more often than that? Do you update your interagency agreement every year? How do you guys communicate and work together?
This is Brenda. Patty, are you still here?
Yes.
Okay. We meet face-to-face at least once, if not more, per year. We just had an opportunity in August to see each other, and I am, always open to travel out to Patty's office and meet prior to a LIHEAP season, and we do that often. The other now is, kind of on a ongoing basis as, any particular need or question might come up. Then, we pick up the phone or shoot each other a quick email so that, we can address that right away. So it's really kind of an ongoing thing. And then as far as, the agreement of how we communicate back and forth, for the example, the weatherization referrals, it's not written in such a way that it has to be renewed every year. But certainly if a need arose that we wanted to add something into that or revisit something, then we would simply schedule a time together and sit down, take a look at that. Patty, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you pretty much, how we communicate through the email and phone calls. So So yeah, that's pretty much it, what Brenda said.
All right, thanks to you both, that helps. And again, to everyone on the call, this is certainly one example of how a tribe incorporates weatherization into their program, working with the state, but you may find that there's a different option for your program, so make sure you're always staying in touch with your regional liaison, and they can help you with your annual plan, your model plan as well. All right, looks like Akam, Holly, and Vicki were crystal clear because we don't have any other questions in the queue. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank Patty and Brenda, Akam, Holly, and Vicki for your great presentation. Thanks for all the guidance and information. As a reminder to all of our wonderful grantees on the line, I will send out the slides to everyone who attended today. And also you can look for this recording in full on the LIHEAP website in about 3 to 4 weeks or so. So you'll definitely have access to listen to this again. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.